What if history's true pivot point slipped by, hidden beneath headlines? What if the real turning point passed unnoticed, not just by the public, but by the very leaders and analysts trusted to chart the course of nations? As the world fixated on the brutal siege at Pokrovsk, something far more decisive was quietly unfolding elsewhere, away from the Klieg lights and the breathless updates. For weeks, the city of Pokrovsk became the focal point of every news cycle. Ukrainian generals spoke of it as a citadel. Western analysts pored over grainy drone footage, dissecting every street, every building that changed hands. Even presidents weighed in, framing Pokrovsk as the fulcrum of the entire conflict. But while attention narrowed to that single city, a cunning trap was springing shut in the south, almost invisible to the outside world. This was not mere coincidence. It was an orchestrated deception, playing out in real time as everyone watched the wrong theater. All the while, the real drama, the true game-changing maneuver, went almost entirely unreported. Missing this shift is not just an error in reporting. It warps our collective grasp of how modern wars are truly won and lost. It undermines trust in what we know and blinds us to the next seismic move in any future conflict. And perhaps most dangerously, it teaches all the wrong lessons to the next generation of leaders, analysts, and ordinary citizens who must one day recognize the signs of history's next pivot. To understand what really happened, we need to rewind the map and uncover how the real story hid in plain sight. We need to trace the misdirection, step by step, starting with the moment the world's gaze locked onto Pokrovsk. Because by the time the headlines screamed of Pokrovsk's fate, the real operation was already underway, quietly, methodically, inexorably reshaping the entire war. Pokrovsk. For weeks, it was the name on every newscaster's lips, a city battered, defiant, and unbroken, or so the world believed. It echoed the heroic tales of Stalingrad or Sarajevo in decades past, where the world rallied around a besieged city, making its defense a symbol of national spirit. In this narrative, Pokrovsk was not just a city, it was the heart of Ukraine's resistance, the place where history would turn. Ukrainian generals, Western analysts, and even President Zelensky himself all kept Pokrovsk center stage. Every daily update, every headline, every televised briefing cast the city as the linchpin of the Ukrainian defense, a citadel of resistance against the Russian advance. It was a narrative meticulously constructed, echoing the way the defense of Verdun was mythologized in the First World War, or how the siege of Leningrad became a touchstone of Soviet resilience during the Second World War. The narrative was relentless. Western reporters hailed the bravery of the defenders, weaving Pokrovsk into a symbol of indomitable spirit. The coverage was so constant, so saturated, that Pokrovsk became shorthand for the war itself. International aid campaigns used the city's plight in fundraising, and social media was ablaze with hashtags and memes that turned the city's suffering into a rallying cry. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. Suddenly, the very same voices that had championed Ukrainian tenacity spoke with grim certainty. Pokrovsk's fall was no longer a question of weeks, but of days. The shift was jarring, reminiscent of the sudden reversals in public mood during the fall of Saigon in 1975 or Mosul in 2014. Few seemed more confused than the German news outlet ZDF, which openly questioned repeated command blunders by Ukraine's top brass. ZDF's anchors wondered aloud. Why were Ukrainian commanders clinging to exposed positions, delaying retreats until it was too late? Was tactical sense being sacrificed for political optics? The questions hinted at deeper fractures inside Kiev's war effort, fissures that now threatened to split wide open. These doubts, aired in public, mirrored the kind of scrutiny leveled at Allied commanders during the disastrous Dieppe raid in 1942, when strategic objectives were clouded by political imperatives. Meanwhile, new reports emerged. Russian forces had closed the ring around multiple Ukrainian units in and near Pokrovsk. Escape was no longer possible. On the ground, Russian troops pressed into the last contested streets, forcing the defenders into isolated, desperate pockets. It was a siege in the classic sense, recalling the encirclement of encampments during the American Civil War, such as at Vicksburg, where the defender's fate was sealed not by the enemy's firepower, but by the inexorable tightening of the noose. With no routes out, Pokrovsk's fate became certain. Western analysts who once praised Ukraine's skill now admitted the obvious. After Pokrovsk and nearby towns fell, Russia would have a clear path to push west, exploiting overstretched lines and exhausted reserves. The world's gaze remained riveted to Pokrovsk, as if nothing else mattered. But that, too, was part of the plan. In the fog of war, what everyone watches is often what you are meant to see. A lesson as old as the Trojan horse, where the apparent gift concealed the true danger. The obsession with Pokrovsk, propelled by media repetition and political theater, was more than a distraction. It was a masterstroke of misdirection, one that drew the world's attention away from the real crisis taking shape elsewhere. While headlines screamed about Pokrovsk, a subtler and far more consequential operation was unfolding in the south, one that would change the course of the war before anyone could react. As Pokrovsk's fate dominated every discussion, the true axis of decision was already shifting far to the south. There, a Russian multi-phase deception quietly set the stage for a breakthrough that would stun both allies and adversaries alike. In military history, such feints are rare in their effectiveness. The last time a similar strategic deception so thoroughly misled an adversary may have been in the run-up to the D-Day landings in 1944, when Operation Fortitude convinced the Germans to keep their best forces away from Normandy. Behind every smokescreen lies real danger. But what was Russia truly plotting as the world's gaze locked on Pokrovsk? The earliest warning did not come from the battlefield. It flared in the furious public outbursts of Ukrainian Member of Parliament Mariana Bezula. Her breakdown was not just political theater. It signaled panic spreading inside Ukraine's high command. When politicians start airing military grievances in public, something has gone deeply wrong, a pattern seen in the final days of South Vietnam's collapse, when parliamentary debates turned into open recriminations. Ukraine's leaders found themselves ensnared in a Russian web, a multi-layered deception. First, Moscow staged a diversion near Dobropilya, pulling Ukrainian reserves north. Then, they intensified pressure on Pokrovsk, manufacturing a sense of looming disaster. Both media and military leadership became fixated on the Donbass front, exactly as Russia intended. This move was reminiscent of the German Ardennes offensive in 1944, when the Allies were convinced the main attack would come elsewhere, only to be stunned by the surprise breakthrough in the forest. The true turning point arrived in Phase 3. While Kiev's command rushed to reinforce the north, Russian forces gathered for a decisive southern strike. The main assault punched through thinly held lines between Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia, sectors left vulnerable after Ukraine shifted its best units away. This kind of exploitation of a weakened sector recalls the Battle of Sedan in 1940, when German panzers broke through a thinly defended French line, triggering the collapse of the Third Republic within weeks. Information itself became a weapon. Headlines, social media, and official statements magnified Pokrovsk's peril, fueling a crisis narrative. The media storm did not merely distract. It actively assisted Russia's plan, amplifying feints and blinding Kiev to the real danger in the south. Modern information warfare, as seen in the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, thrives on creating confusion and manipulating perception, often rendering the truth invisible until it is far too late. On the ground, Russian troops slipped past Ukrainian strongholds, exploiting the gaps left by redeployed reserves. Southern defenses, now hollowed out, collapsed with alarming speed. By the time Kiev recognized the scope of the breakthrough, disaster was unfolding. Reserves were trapped, supply lines were cut, and entire brigades risked encirclement. The effect was similar to the German encirclement at Stalingrad, where the Sixth Army found itself isolated and eventually forced to surrender, changing the course of the Second World War on the Eastern Front. What was at stake was far greater than lost trenches or towns. The very ability of Ukraine's leadership to read the battlefield and defend the nation was on the line. Misreading the enemy's intent in war invites disaster. Not just territorial losses, but the unraveling of national security and trust. Political shockwaves could undermine Kiev's standing at home and abroad, while Moscow's hand grew stronger. In every major conflict, from the defeat of the French at Dien Bien Phu to the collapse of the Iraqi army in 2014, the loss of operational initiative proved fatal. Why does the southern breakthrough matter far more than all the noise in Donbass? Because in war, the difference between what is seen and what is real can decide the fate of nations. And in the south, Russia's gambit changed everything. Winning a battle means little if you lose the war. For Ukraine, the true main blow was never about the headlines around Pokrovsk. It was the silent, decisive maneuver that unfolded on the southern front, far from the cameras. As the world watched the Donbass grind, a deeper threat was taking shape. The contrast between the Donbass sector and Dnipropetrovsk could not be starker. Donbass is a crucible of attrition, where even a battered retreat can preserve Ukraine's core fighting force. There, lines have been prepared, withdrawals anticipated. Painful losses, yes, but survivable. The history of warfare is replete with such withdrawals, from the Russian Great Retreat of 1915 to the fighting withdrawal of British forces at Dunkirk in 1940. Dnipropetrovsk, however, is something else entirely. It is the logistical heart of eastern Ukraine, the central artery through which supplies, reinforcements, and fuel flow. If Russia seizes this region, Ukraine's entire eastern military effort risks suffocation. No ammunition, no fuel, no hope of holding out. Supply lines cut not just for the front, but for the army as a whole. In a modern war, where logistics are the lifeblood of operations, the loss of a hub like Dnipropetrovsk is analogous to the fall of Singapore in 1942, which crippled British power in the Pacific. The stakes escalate brutally. With Dnipropetrovsk lost, Russian forces could split Ukraine in two, isolating Kiev from its southern industrial base and the Black Sea. Ukraine would become a landlocked enclave, its economy choked, its leverage in any future peace talks all but erased. This scenario mirrors the strategic consequences of the Confederacy's loss of Vicksburg in the American Civil War, which split the South and opened the Mississippi River to Union control. What makes this breakthrough truly chilling is how it was achieved. Instead of battering at Ukraine's strongest fortifications, Russian troops used modern maneuver warfare, sidestepping resistance and exploiting overlooked seams. This was not the bloody slog everyone expected, but a calculated, flexible operation, a sign of evolving Russian doctrine. It recalls the German blitzkrieg tactics of 1940, which prioritized speed, surprise, and bypassing strong points to shatter enemy cohesion. The shockwaves were immediate. Western analysts, once confident in Ukraine's defense, faltered as reports trickled in. In Kyiv, panic and doubt surged through the corridors of power. If the logistical core is gone, what is left to defend? Political consequences followed swiftly. Western backers, already uneasy with mounting costs and stalled offensives, began to reconsider. Behind closed doors, officials drafted quiet exit strategies. The risk was no longer just territorial, it was existential. Ukraine's survival, its negotiating power, even the security order of Eastern Europe hung in the balance. For the watching world, this was a brutal lesson. Strategic deception, amplified by information warfare, can reshape more than a single battle. It can blind leaders, mislead analysts, and change the trajectory of entire nations. When attention is fixed on the wrong front, the real war is lost before anyone realizes it. The lessons echo those of the Yom Kippur War, when Israeli intelligence failed to see the true axis of attack, leading to a near-catastrophic surprise. The world's attention, misdirected by clever feints, now faces the consequences of a war fought in the shadows. As the dust settles, Ukraine and its allies must reckon with hard truths and even harder choices. What truly separates a clever strategy from self-defeating theater? And will you see the difference next time? Let us break down what leaders, militaries, and all of us can learn from this operation. Multi-layered deception is ancient in warfare, yet what happened near Dnipropetrovsk was its evolution in the age of total surveillance. In a world where satellites watch every move and rumors flash across social media in seconds, deception now demands not just one trick, but layers upon layers, discipline without cracks, and a deep grasp of how stories shape reality. Consider the Allied deceptions before D-Day, which involved phantom armies, fake radio traffic, and double agents, all painstakingly coordinated. Now, the information environment is even more complex and volatile. The Russian General Staff did not rely on brute force alone. They assembled a web of real and phantom offensives, weaving confusion until even seasoned observers could not see where the threat was real. Ukrainian leaders, along with Western analysts, found themselves caught in a drama written by someone else, guided by headlines, not by what was actually unfolding. While the world's gaze was glued to Pokrovsk, the real breakthrough was happening, quietly, on another front. This was not a tactical stumble, but a psychological one. When military purpose is traded for political theater, defeat grows near. The hunger to spin heroic tales, to dominate the news cycle, can blind even skilled commanders to the true state of the fight. History is merciless in this lesson. Those who believe their own propaganda risk turning mere setbacks into catastrophes. During the Falklands War, for example, British intelligence carefully parsed Argentine broadcasts for hints, refusing to believe their own hype, a discipline that proved crucial in the campaign's success. True victories are rarely loud. They are patient, silent, and often invisible until it is too late for the losing side to respond. In the coming years, this operation will be dissected in war colleges as a masterclass in strategic distraction, proof that the information space can be as lethal as any missile or armored column. It may stand alongside the best examples of Sun Tzu's principle. All warfare is based on deception. For leaders and ordinary citizens alike, the stakes could not be higher. If we cannot distinguish genuine strategy from empty spectacle, we risk falling into the same traps, on the battlefield, in the media, and in our politics. Learning these lessons is not just wise. It is vital for national security, public trust, and the ability to see the true shape of danger before disaster strikes. In a world saturated with information, discernment becomes our last line of defense. Consider how rapid news cycles in 2020 misled the public about the course of the pandemic, or how economic bubbles have burst when reality finally caught up with hype. But how did this deception unfold in real time, and what signs did everyone miss? To understand, we must unravel the operation step by step, not only to comprehend this war, but to guard against similar misdirection in the future. Let us imagine, for a moment, the decision-making rooms in Kyiv. Maps litter the tables, reports stream in from every front, and the pressure mounts with every new headline about Pokrovsk. Advisors urge reinforcement, fearing political backlash if the city is lost. Meanwhile, in Moscow, planners monitor Ukrainian deployments, looking for the moment when enough reserves have been pulled north to leave the south exposed. This is not just a battle of bullets, it is a battle of perception, tempo, and nerves. If you were a Ukrainian general, what should you have done differently? The answer lies in historical precedent. Generals who survived the German blitzkrieg in France did so by refusing to commit their reserves to the first crisis, instead holding back and looking for the enemy's main blow. In the Yom Kippur War, the turning point came when Israeli commanders stopped chasing every feint and focused on the real threat. Practical step: build a dedicated deception analysis team, whose sole job is to challenge the consensus, scrutinize intelligence for patterns, and model enemy intent as a series of alternatives, not a single narrative. For political leaders, the lesson is even starker. Resist the urge to chase headlines. In the first Gulf War, coalition leaders ignored Iraqi propaganda about the defense of Kuwait City, focusing instead on the flanking maneuver through the desert. When politicians become captive to daily news cycles, they risk turning strategic decisions into PR gambits, usually to disastrous effect. For the media, the imperative is to cultivate skepticism, to probe for what is not being said, to seek voices outside the consensus. During the Vietnam War, some of the most prescient reporting came from journalists who questioned official briefings, seeking out local sources and alternative perspectives. Practical step. Every newsroom should maintain a devil's advocate team whose task is to challenge the main narrative and investigate potential blind spots. For ordinary citizens, the lesson is humility in the face of complexity. Whether following a war or a pandemic or an economic crisis, the truth is rarely as simple as the loudest headline. Seek out diverse sources, ask what is being omitted, and remember that in every major crisis, the decisive moves are often the quietest. Practical step. Develop a personal habit of reading from at least 3 different outlets, including those you normally disagree with, before forming a firm opinion. History's real turning points are rarely found in the headlines. The true question is, what will you notice next time? Will you see through the next layer of misdirection, or be swept along by the crowd? As the world fixated on the brutal fight for Pokrovsk, the war's most decisive move unfolded almost invisibly. Russian planners orchestrated a deception in 3 careful stages, pulling eyes north and west. Meanwhile, the south, where Dnipropetrovsk lay vulnerable, became the quiet stage for a breakthrough that changed everything. Accepting the media's narrative without question risks missing these critical shifts. Here, political storytelling did more than obscure the truth. It amplified leadership mistakes and eroded Ukraine's defense from within. The collapse that followed was not a result of overwhelming force, but of misdirection and fatal distraction. This is not just a lesson for generals, it is a warning for all of us. When leaders chase public approval instead of reality, when experts echo each other instead of probing deeper, the real battles are lost in the noise. The public, meanwhile, is reduced to a bystander, its understanding shaped by what it is told rather than what is true. So as you consider these events, ask yourself, will you read between the lines or settle for the surface? Because in modern war, information can be as decisive as any weapon, and your ability to question the story may be your last real defense. The next time headlines scream about a single city or dramatic moment, remember, the real pivot point may be unfolding in the shadows, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice before it is too late.